When we baptize someone in our congregation, it's common that we ask if there are any particular requests for music that might be included in the service. Maybe something from the person's home culture, something maybe we could sing right after the baptism as a way to welcome and celebrate with the person newly baptized. So in preparing for Benjamin's baptism today, I asked Angel and Paul if they had any particular music they would like to include. And they responded right away with the song that we are going to sing right after the sermon today, while the family makes their way to the font. It's called "There's a Wideness in God's Mercy." In my opinion, this is a good song to sing just about any Sunday, but Angel had a particular reason for suggesting it for today. When she was about 6 months pregnant with Benjamin, she came here on a Sunday when we happened to be singing this song. And she said that something in the melody and in the words touched her powerfully that day. Something about this God whose love is greater than the measures of the mind, whose mercy can't be bound by the strictures that we humans always tend to put around it. It was a song that she said she felt was being sung for her and for her yet-to-be-born child that day. So she took the bulletin home with her, and since that time she has been singing this song to Benjamin. It's one he will know well. And part of me thinks I should just say amen and stop the sermon now. Because that picture of a mother singing God's mercy to her child is a better sermon than anything I'm going to tell you today. It's also a beautiful picture of what we are about in baptizing Benjamin. We are surrounding him with words and melodies of God's mercy that we hope will always be there in his life as a song he feels he has always known, something that will be there as eternal and unending in his life. So we ask the family if there are musical requests for the service. We don't usually ask if there are requests about biblical texts. We tend to let the lectionary, the prescribed order of readings, take care of that. And you might have guessed as much when you heard Jesus arguing with the Pharisees about the Sabbath this morning, and also that cheery little bit from Paul's second letter to the Corinthians. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus. That might not be a song you want to sing a child to sleep with. In fact, it might be enough to leave you questioning whether you actually want to go through with this whole Christian faith thing. That goes for all of you who are joining the congregation this morning also. Who wants to be part of the afflicted, perplexed, persecuted, struck down, death-carrying group we call the church? This reading is probably not as immediately appealing as the song that we're going to sing a little later. There are hard edges all over the place here, pointing to the perilousness of following Jesus, the unpredictability, and the danger of it. And at the center of it is this strange and intriguing image. We have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be clear that this extraordinary power comes from God and does not belong to us, does not come from us. I want you to think for a moment about what you do with something very precious in your home, something you value a great deal and don't want to lose. Maybe you have some important documents locked in a file cabinet or a safe. Maybe you have a precious heirloom, something passed on from a previous generation that you keep safe in a drawer or up high on a shelf. Maybe you have a photograph that you particularly cherish and keep in an elegant frame on the wall with UV-resistant glass to be sure that sunlight doesn't damage it. When we have something precious in our possession, that value tends to be reflected in the way that we keep and preserve it, in a place of particular honor or prominence or security. That may be how we work, but Paul says that is not how God works. According to Paul, God uses clay jars. If you have ever been to an archaeological site around the Mediterranean or to a museum that's associated with one, then you have seen these before. I had the privilege of visiting ancient Corinth this last spring, and you get the impression that in a museum in a place like that, they really don't even know what to do with all the clay jars that show up when you start to dig around. It seems these jars were everywhere in the world that Paul inhabited. And that's because they were utterly common, ordinary household things. Pottery jars were inexpensive to make. They could serve a wide variety of functions around the home, holding food or medicine or oil. They weren't only for the wealthy or the elite. They weren't fancy or especially noticeable in themselves. Clay jars were two things. They were common and they were useful. So I've been trying to think of the modern day equivalent for a first century clay jar, something they will find lots of if one day my apartment is inexplicably covered in lava and archaeologists come to dig it out a few centuries later. And I've decided that in my home, the equivalent is ice cream containers. You know the ones I'm talking about, right? The plastic ones with the lid that snaps on. In my house, these are containers for just about anything. Leftovers, yes, but also pens and pencils and crayons, extra soap or shampoo, cleaning products, and of course Legos. They're great containers for Legos. The clay jar image is really a better one than those thin plastic boxes because the jars were not mass-produced. Each one was unique since they were all made by hand. They varied in size and shape, some had designs, some were painted. The point is that they were ubiquitous, something you found wherever there were people. And I think that's what Paul is getting at here. God's greatest treasure, the gospel, the light of creation that still shines in the darkness and illumines our way. That light is not archived in a secret vault or hidden in a golden treasure chest or locked up in the pages of the Bible. It is all around you, and it's in old ice cream boxes, the kind that you have a stack of in the cabinet beneath your sink. Of course, these common everyday vessels with something very precious inside are you and the people around you this morning, and maybe the people you pass on the street. God has not reserved the light of life for spiritual giants or wise sages alone. It's in the most ordinary of containers, in the sort that you find all around you. There's this persistent idea out there, and you know this, I think, that church is basically for people who have it all put together, who have their beliefs all worked out, and who are always positive in their attitude about life, and who never lose their patience, and who never snap at their children in the grocery store. Last one's maybe a little personal. But that is certainly not the kind of followers Jesus seemed to attract, and it's not the kind of church Paul is describing here. A clay jar church is not full of perfect people. It's full of ordinary ones who are trying to pay attention to the extraordinary power of God at work in the world, to the precious treasure of the gospel entrusted to them. It's full of people like you and me, drawn together by a God who does not mind working with ordinary stuff, who always seems to work that way, in fact. Kevin Kling is a storyteller who comes from Minnesota, where I'm also from. And he tells one very short story that I think sort of tugs toward this clay jar church way of seeing things. It's called The Story of the Cracked Pot. It's very short. Back in the days when pots and pans could talk, which indeed they still do, there lived a man. And in order to have water every day, he had to walk down the hill and fill 2 pots and then walk home. One day it was discovered that one of the pots had a crack, and as time went on, the crack widened. Finally, the pot turned to the man and said, "You know, every day you take me to the river, and by the time you get home, half of the water has leaked out. Please replace me with a better pot." And the man said, "You don't understand. As you spill, you water the wildflowers by the side of the path." And sure enough, on the side of the path where the cracked pot was carried, beautiful flowers grew, while the other side was barren. "I think I'll keep you," said the man. A man who keeps a cracked pot around to water the wildflowers as he walks is not a very practical guy. But a God who puts the most precious treasure in clay jars is not a very practical God either. We're talking about a God who simply delights in people, who is extravagant, even prodigal, when it comes to love. Benjamin, in a few moments, we will speak God's promises over you, and we will mark you with the cross of Christ. We can't promise that life will not leave you with your own share of bumps and chips and bruises. We can't promise that you will never be afflicted or perplexed. But we can promise that into the clay jar of your life, God's extraordinary power and grace have been poured abundantly. And we can sing of the wide mercy of God that goes before you and comes after you, that holds you in this moment, and that will be there to catch you, no matter what. Amen.